have me. I am Tanya Thompson. Oh, thank you, team. I am Tanya Thompson. I am your field rep. And we're going to get off on a drive today. We don't know where we're going. See, I told you today was interesting. So we're going to start right up with Casey. Casey's going to talk to us a little bit about the QPRs and LEPs. Casey, take it away.
Okay. I'm just sharing screen real quick. Let me know when you can see the QPR form.
We got it.
All right. So my focus today is just to talk about a few sections of the QPR where we've experienced some issues during review with our cohort 2 grantees, and just wanted to take the opportunity to clarify the intent of some of these sections and the type of information we're looking for from you as you start to work on both your quarter 1 and quarter 2 QPRs, which are due May 15th. So I'm just going to scroll through the QPR template and give some tips, pointers, if you will, on some specific sections where we tend to have a little bit of conversation with grantees in hopes that your first QPR submissions will be great and top-notch. Okay. So I'm going to scroll here to section A, which focuses on your project description. And specifically of interest here is this second question, which asks about risk needs assessments. So this one's asking if you formally assess the participants entering your project to identify their level of risk or need. And specifically, we're referring to formal, validated, criminogenic risk need assessment tools. So common examples that you may be familiar with are the ORAS, Ohio Risk Assessment System, the LSCMI, which is the Level of Service Case Management Inventory, or even COMPASS here in California. And I forgot to write down that one's name, full name. So apologies about that. So it is not a requirement that you have to use a criminogenic risk need assessment tool for your project, but this question is specifically around those types of tools. So if you are using a formal, valid criminogenic risk need assessment tool, you would choose yes here in this drop-down menu. If you're not, that's okay. Just select no. And either way, we're looking for a description to tell us how you're assessing your participants' needs. So if you select yes and you're using the ORAS, tell us yes, we're using the ORAS, and describe how you're using that. If you're not, tell us how you're assessing your participants' needs at the point of entry in your program. Okay. This question is related to some demographic information that we asked for in section F, and I'll highlight that when we get down to section F. But generally, a formal validated risk needs assessment tool will result in a score that can categorize the person's level of risk in terms of low, moderate, or high. And so this is related to, I'll get there, the demographics that we're asking for around risk, where we ask you to categorize your participants into low, moderate, or high risk. Again, referring to a valid, formal assessment of criminogenic risk and need. And I see Tanya with her hand up, so I'm going to pause and let her chime in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify and actually really kind of get your thoughts here to make sure we're on the same page. If they are not formally assessing risk, need, responsivity, or the criminogenic risk level, on that section in the QPR, the data section that your report talking about, would those then be left blank if they don't assess for them? I do understand some of our grantees at least they track it initially, maybe if they get it from probation or parole, if they're referred from them. But if they're not formally assessing them themselves, do you still want that information documented?
If they're getting it from probation or parole and it's at the time of entry, you can document it as the low, moderate, or high. If you yourself do not have that from a score from a formal tool, you should report it as unknown or did not collect. So there's a row in there for unknown, did not collect. And let's say you enrolled 10 participants that quarter and none of them you formally assessed, then it would be 10 as unknown, did not collect.
Thank you.
And we'll review that again when we see the actual table.
Thank you.
So I do want to mention, I don't want to just sit here and hear myself talk. If you guys have questions on any of these items, feel free to ask them or type it into chat. Just put the word request in front of it in all caps so that we can easily see that. Okay. So I'll pause for a moment, see if there are any questions on risk needs assessment before I move on. Alicia, go ahead.
I just wanted to be very clear, if we are using a risk assessment, but it's not one of the specific ones you mentioned that are specific to assessing criminogenic needs, you want us to check no there.
That is correct. If it's not a criminogenic risk needs assessment, so the risk of reoffending or their needs in order to not reoffend, you would select no. But please describe what you are using, because I'm sure there are a number of great tools out there that you guys are using to decide what services people need. So please feel free to describe those.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I will move on then. The next section I want to focus on is still in this section A, project description. And it's all the way down here on number 5, participants' definition of success. So we want you to describe the measurable milestones your project uses to determine when a participant has successfully completed services in your project. So this should be a very clear, succinct statement that covers the entirety of your program, not just components of it. Some examples for you that we've seen work well and we feel are very succinct and clear. So for one example, it's they gain employment and hold the job for over 2 months. Okay. So another example may be completion of their outlined goals in their individual care plan or their individual case management plan. So when they're enrolled into the program, if you do a variety of assessments and sit down and talk with them and develop an individual plan for that person with their individual goals and objectives, one definition of success may be they completed those goals or successfully achieved those goals and objectives in their individual plan. Another example that we have is the individual is employed, has housing and transportation, and support organizations and people in place. So this definition is going to be specific to your project, but needs to be clear, measurable, and a fairly succinct statement about what it means when somebody is successful in your project. Okay. This definition is really important for you to have up front, particularly as you're enrolling people, because it's related to section. I'm sorry, I can't remember which section it is. We'll get there and I'll point it out. But it's about outcomes. When you exit people from your program and then you start reporting outcomes for them, we want to know when you report somebody as successful, what that means in terms of your project. Okay. Any questions about definition of success? Okay, so one question. in the chat is, I just want to double check, there's no minimum or maximum requirement for how many successful milestones there needs to be. That is correct. This is specific to your project. We at BSCC are not defining it. It's specific to your project. But some guidance I want to give you is that it should cover the entirety of the program, or everything you want to achieve with that. You want to have somebody, let's say they have a couple goals and maybe only one goal is required for successful exit, and you report them as successful exit. They might come back and start working on additional goals, and then you'll be counting them as re-enrollments, and it makes your data tracking a whole lot more challenging. Just capture the whole thing of what you want to achieve with an individual or help them achieve, so that you're not continually exiting and then re-enrolling the same person. Okay, so this will come up in another section, but re-enrollments should be rare and the exception to the rule. Okay, your data tracking will get very difficult if, let's say your project has 3 subcomponents. If they achieve one subcomponent and you exit them, and then you re-enroll them for the second, and then you exit them, and then you re-enroll them, that becomes a nightmare for data tracking. Just make all 3 components part of your successful completion, if that's appropriate for your project, and then you won't have to track all these re-enrollments and exits. Okay. Any additional thoughts on that, Tanya? Nope. Okay.
No, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we'll move on to section C, which has to do with goals and objectives. In your individual template, it has been customized to include the goals and the objectives that were outlined in your funded proposal. If any modifications were made with Tanya's approval, those should be reflected in your template. If they're not, just reach out to us and we'll, make sure that that's updated.
We will have a couple of those, Casey, for cohort 3 that I don't think I remember to send your way. So we will work on those.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you.
So for the goals and objectives section, the very first question we have is for you to describe progress toward the goal and its associated objectives during the reporting period. And what I really want to stress here is make sure that you're providing a description here that is related and directly tied to those goals and objectives. So for example, if your objective says we're going to enroll 100 participants annually, I want to know so far in this annual period, how many participants have you enrolled? So that's a very different number than this quarter I enrolled 19. You can say this quarter I enrolled 19, and over the course of this year, that makes for a total of 30. So be very specific to the objective, because if you're not providing a description that's tied to the objective, we'll ask you to do so, and it'll go back for review. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Not seeing any questions, I will move on.
One just came in the chat, Casey. I have attempted to populate the goals and objectives as outlined in the deliverables of the grant, but was unable to.
Okay, your template should come already pre-populated with the goals and objectives that were in your proposal. If you don't see that in your template, reach out to us and we'll take a look directly at that, but they should already be in your template and you don't have to populate it yourself. Because this will be a section that you will not be able to write in. It'll actually be locked in your template because your goals and objectives are locked in based on your funded proposal or whatever Tanya has approved. So if you're not seeing that there, perhaps we missed it in your template, reach out to us and we'll help you.
Thank you, Casey.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I don't see any other hands going up.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to section D, there were two main questions in here. The first one, we asked you to provide any highlights and or accomplishments that occurred during the reporting period with your project. And a lot of times people like to tell us about the achievements of individuals in your projects, which are really great to hear. We just ask that you don't use personal identifying information. So don't refer to them by their first and last name. If you want to use initials, that's okay. And the reason is, you know, we're a government agency. Everything is public information if requested. So we want to protect the identity of your participants. So please don't say, you know, John Smith was, you know, placed in housing and got a job. Well, those are really great things and we want to hear about it, or, you know, it's something else that was really awesome for somebody to achieve in their life. Just use initials or use a participant ID number. Okay, you really want to protect the privacy of your participants. Moving on to section F. This is where in the QPR, we really start to focus on your participants, specifically looking at those who were enrolled in your project. And the first thing we ask are the total number of participants that were referred to your project, and then the total number that were actually enrolled in your project. So in general, in a quarter, we should not see the number of participants enrolled greater than the number who were referred. And preferably, we would see that number referred greater than the number enrolled. Your program should have some type of mechanism for screening participants who were enrolled in your project to make sure that your project is appropriate for them. The first one would be, have they spent time in a state prison? And the second one may be, let's say if you're a job program, do they need help getting a job or improving their skills, right? Getting a better job. So those are just some examples that come off the top of my head, but you should have some type of mechanism within your program of like kind of funneling down, making sure that you're enrolling the people in your program that one are the right population and your program is appropriate for. Okay. Do you want to add anything there, Tanya, or are you good? Okay. So generally, we're going to ask, especially now in quarter 1 and 2, most of your participants are going to be enrolled for the first time. This row for second time enrollments would be once an individual exits your project for any reason. It could be successful completion, and then they come back and say, you know, now I'd like to work on X. And you say, oh, we can help you with that. And you re-enroll them into your project. Or it could be that you lost contact with them over a period of time, say 3 to 6 months, and you exited them for losing contact. And then they finally come back and they're ready to engage and be a part of the program. So that's the definition there of first time and second time enrollments. I believe we've talked briefly about if you've had a, if you're carrying over a project. So we talked about having a mechanism of exiting participants from, let's say, a cohort 2 or cohort 1 project before enrolling them here into this cohort 3 project. So anything, and I believe, Tanya, correct me if I'm wrong, we talked about you would exit them in your cohort 1 or 2 project and then report them as a first time enrollment here in your cohort 3 project.
Yes, that is correct. If they are coming from cohort 1, they do need to fully exit cohort 1, and then they do need to be formally enrolled into your cohort 3 project.
Okay. Okay. Any questions? I don't see any. Okay. All right, so this next section, F.2, is asking for the demographic information of only those participants who you enrolled in the project. So again, we talked about that funnel between referral to enrolled. Here in F.2, we're only asking you to report for those individuals who were enrolled in the project. And so for each individual who is enrolled in the project, we're asking a variety of information. The first is point of entry. So where did that referral come from? And we just want you to report the primary source of that referral. So let's say you enrolled 10 individuals. The values that you enter down this column, when we sum them, should enter 10 here in the bottom. Okay, and for those of you who may have experience with the QPRs for cohort 2, in that PDF form, it does total for you. One of the drawbacks of going to this Word version is that this will not total for you. So you're going to have to do some math, do some basic addition, and make sure that these total values match with your total number of enrolled. Okay, but that is a drawback that we get in exchange for having areas where you write that expand and you can see everything that you wrote. So it was a decision. Okay, so I see that there is a question in here, or did somebody take care of that?
Hold on, I got you. It says request. That sounds like if we carry someone over from another cohort, we would count them under referred or first time. Yes, if you carry someone from cohort 1 into cohort 3, they are going to be enrolled first time into cohort 3. They are not going to be a second enrollment or anything like that because they're starting fresh into cohort 3 because cohort 1 has sunset and expired. So they are a new enrollment for your cohort 3 project. The next one in the chat says, I may have missed you already answering this, but a participant going from cohort 1 to cohort 3, is that considered a new enrollment or re-enrollment? So it's the same question. So yes, it is a new enrollment. Request, we are a cohort 2 WHO winner and a cohort 3 RA winner. If we have clients in the cohort 2 WHO program, but identify their need for housing support and the client would like to participate in the cohort 3 RA, we have to exit them from cohort 2 before they enroll? No, those are different project types. So you are basically referring from your warm handoff project to your rental assistance project. So they would be co-enrolled in your warm handoff and your rental assistance. What I will add here for guidance is you do want to make sure you have a very clear policy on how you are referring participants between your warm handoff and your rental assistance projects. And you want to make sure that you're able to track and document those activities separately because they are 2 separate projects and your participants are counting separately and differently for each project. So you do want to make sure that your policies are clear, your program expectations are clear, and how you are documenting and tracking your folks are also clear.
I would also like to say that for that individual, please only report outcomes related to housing in your RA program.
Say that one more time, Casey.
When the individual exits and you're reporting outcomes for that individual in the QPR, any positive outcome related to housing, say placed in permanent housing, should be reported only in your rental assistance QPR, not in your WHO QPR.
Right. Thank you. What is the name of the criminal needs assessment that you spoke about? Can you put the name in the chat? We mentioned 3 Yeah, we'll throw them in the chat. It was the ORAS, the Ohio Risk Assessment, the LSCMI, and the COMPAS. Those were the three that we mentioned specifically, but there are others. The key there is to make sure that it is a validated criminogenic risk assessment tool. Those are the ones that you would identify for the QPR. It has to be a validated criminogenic risk need assessment. That's what we're looking for. If you are not using those, as Casey mentioned, it's not a requirement, but you just need to make sure you're reporting it properly. But yes, we will throw those in the chat. Give me just a few minutes. Next question says, as it pertains to housing, are we to abide by fair market rent value? Do you recommend we use a HUD, HQS form, or ESG habitat? I can't say the word. Habitability quality standards for housing inspections. Those are program decisions that you have to make within your internal processing. What we do say from BSCC is you have to make whatever you're using for standards, it has to be reasonable, and it has to be, within, it has to make sense to us. So if you are not using fair market rent and you are wanting the grant to pay for rents that are outside of fair market, that might pose a problem. So you do need to make sure that whatever you are using to value what your project will pay, you do want to make sure that it is reasonable. And I'll leave that there. A CBO rents a building from the owner and then rents to reentry populations. Can we support reentry renters with BSCC funding? That is a very specific situation. I think we might have discussed this before, but that's going to require a little bit more detail than we can address here on this call. I think that's Jackie from Family Assistance. So let's make some time to have that discussion. Where I can actually understand how that's working. So we know it's just so that I can provide proper guidance, because there are some nuances in there that may or may not make that acceptable.
All right. So to follow up on the discussion about that risk needs assessment and us asking about it in terms of demographics for individuals reported as low, moderate, or high, I have to retract that. That is a field that was included in the cohort 2 QPR. That field is not in this cohort 3 QPR. I was just searching for that, Tanya, and I did not make that in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that is something that is not in the QPR.
Okay.
Okay. Apologies as we juggle multiple cohorts. Sorry.
Thank you. Good catch, I guess.
Good catch either now or should have been prior. We'll save that judgment.
Right. Thanks.
So moving on to section G. This section is asking about participants engaged in your project, regardless of the quarter that they enrolled in, asking about what services they received. So when we say total number of actively engaged participants, this includes any individuals enrolled during the quarter and prior quarters who continue to engage and receive services. So for example, if in quarter 1 you enrolled 10 individuals, and quarter 2 you enrolled 10 individuals, and nobody's exited your program yet, you could have up to 20 individuals reported as actively engaged in quarter 2, right? Because you have the 10 from quarter 1 and the 10 from quarter 2. So this section is not specific to just those individuals you enrolled that quarter. It's all individuals you were serving, regardless of which quarter they were enrolled. Okay. And as long as they received at least one service during that period. Okay. So that's the definition of actively engaged. which is here. And then for each individual who is actively engaged in your project during that quarter, we're asking you to report the types of services they received, okay? So the sum for any one cell here could be the maximum value there, could be your total number of participants engaged over the quarter, okay? So people can be reported here for receiving multiple services, but one single cell should not exceed the total number of actively engaged participants. And about reporting services, these are services that you have confirmed they received. So let's say, for example, in your program, you refer somebody out for mental health services. That referral alone isn't enough to report somebody as receiving mental health services. You need to follow up and make sure that that person did indeed go and receive at some point during that reporting period those mental health services. Okay, so if you're providing it directly, that should be fairly easy to confirm that people attended and participated in some of these services. But if some of your things are on a referral basis, you need a mechanism for making sure that that person followed through and actually did receive that service. Okay. Any questions here on services provided to participants? No. Okay. Next question, next section is related to participants who are exiting your project. So the first thing we ask is the total number of participants who exited during the reporting period. And for those, what is the reason for their exit? And we have several categories for you to choose from. We have successful completion still active versus successful completion inactive. So we know a lot of you, when somebody graduates from your program, you don't want to turn them away for services. And that's totally fine if you still want to help them with some of these light touch, what I would call light touch types of services that or needs that they may have. And so that person would be classified as still active. So they completed, let's say, their individual case plan, but they're still participating, let's say, in weekly meetings because they find them beneficial for them to stay on track. So they would still be active. Inactive would be somebody who graduates, they've gone off, they're doing great. They say, I don't really need you anymore, I'm doing great. And so that would be inactive. We have dropped out, lost contact, non-compliant and asked to leave. They were arrested or incarcerated, or you've just determined that your services were not appropriate for that individual. And then G, unknown, which has been used occasionally, but I'm not sure what we don't have covered here. So I'm sure we'll find out as reporting goes on. But this, you should only be reporting one of these per individual. So when I sum or you sum down this column, this total here should equal the number you report here. Okay, just some checks and balances on our data collection. And then for section H.3, this section is only for successful completions. Okay, so we are tracking here at BSCC the outcomes and demographic information of individuals who successfully completed your program. And this is just a decision we made to simplify data reporting for you. And so what we'll have you report for successful completions, whether inactive or active, their demographic information, once again, and this is the demographic information that you collected at entry. Okay, so if they enrolled in your program and they were 27, but when they exited, they were 28, still report 27. This allows us to kind of get a sense of what type of individuals based on demographics are more successful in the programs. Okay. Again, this total here in all of these cells should sum up to your total number of successful participants. Okay. So these are, again, checks and balances that if they don't equal, we'll, you know, ask why, ask you to update it and send your QPR back for review. And then finally, we have participant exits. And again, outcomes, participant outcomes. Again, this is focusing on individuals who successfully completed your program, whether they're still active or inactive. You can report multiple outcomes for an individual. So again, each row, the value entered here the maximum value in there would be the total number of people you exited that quarter. But a person can be reported in multiple rows, meaning they can have more than one outcome reported to us. Generally around these, we have definitions for what we mean by improve their employment status, and that's in the QPR data reporting guide. But these are things that you should be tracking and you should have some type of objective measure for from the period of enrollment to the period of exit, okay? So if they come in unemployed, obviously that's a fairly easy thing to track and measure, and they leave full-time employed, that would be somebody who improved their employment status, okay? If they came in and they didn't have, you know, looking at improved transportation self-sufficiency, right? If they didn't have a vehicle or didn't know how to use the bus system or didn't have bus passes, and when they left, they knew how to do those, or they had their own personal vehicle, that would be, you know, something there. Basically just saying you need a way to make sure that you're accurately capturing these and reporting them. Right? Some type of measure or tool. All right. Okay. So that concludes a review of some of the areas where we've, you know, had to, with cohort 2, kind of have some back and forth with grantees, which is okay. But sharing that here with you all in hopes of setting you up for successfully completing these QPRs, perhaps with a little less review from us at BSCC. So happy to take any questions you may have, and happy to take any questions you may have by email to the ARG cohort 3 inbox as you're working on your quarter 1 and quarter 2 QPRs, which are due May 15th.
Casey, I have a question. Good morning. Back to the section for the reason for exit. I might have missed it, but for the successful completion still active, is that going back to what you mentioned of the program establishing like what it is, a successful completion for an individual, and they might have multiple reasons of the client completing the program? Like, so if they completed one portion of whatever the goal that they set, then that would be successful completion still active because they're still working on the others. Am I interpreting that correctly or no?
No, so let's say if in their individual case plan, they have 3 goals, you wouldn't want to report them as a successful completion until they've accomplished all 3 goals. Okay, then they would be a successful completion. So the only reason we distinguish between still active and active is we hear a lot from CBOs of like, look, we don't want to just kick them out the door and tell them we won't help them. So you may have some light touch services that even after they finish their individual case plan, they would like to still participate in. So let's say if you have weekly coaching sessions or something like that, they may still come back and participate in those things and want to be involved, but they don't necessarily have an individual case plan with very specific goals that they're working on with you.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's one. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. There's another question in the chat, but finish your thought and then we'll go to that one.
I was starting to read the chat. So.
Oh. You want me to read it out loud?
Sure, we'll stick with what's working.
Okay. For the participant outcomes, do we have to have a formal tool to assess for the outcome? What would suffice as a mechanism for measuring?
So I think it really depends on the outcome that we're discussing, right? So if somebody comes to you and says, I'm unemployed, and there's no way, like they don't have any income, right? And then you get them a job and you verify that they now have income and you verify that they're employed. However you're verifying that, that works for me. But something like reduced substance use, you probably need to have a validated tool, right? You don't just want to say at exit in an interview, do you think you've reduced your substance use? And then that's that individual's opinion, right? So if that individual's focus, you know, when you do this initial assessment is, you know, I need to work on some of my substance use issues, you may need to find a tool around that's a valid formal assessment of substance use that could like help you give a score to that, so that if you gave it at entrance and you gave it at exit and you saw a reduction or an increase, depending on how that tool's set up, you would be able to report that outcome. Okay. So it just kind of is dependent on the outcome that we're talking about. Some of it's, you know, fairly easy to validate, while others may require a tool.
Casey, I have a follow-up with that. That was my question. So I know like with the, you know, the outcomes that might not require like a formal assessment tool, as you shared about with like the substance use or, you know, whatnot. Like with the example you gave, like the employment or the income status, I know you said verification. So are you guys accepting, let's say, for example, they, let's say they ended up, you know, we refer them or link them up with, you know, a manager at whatever store and they end up getting employment there, right? Is the verbal, their verbal notification to us, hey, I got hired. Does that suffice as verifying that, or would that be efficient or sufficient for that verification, or would it be more so like documentation, like, you know, so, you know, would, in a sense, my question is, would the verbal notification from the client themselves for some of these, would that suffice as verification for the participant outcome?
My preference would be some type of documentation. So it'd be very easy to ask for a pay stub.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
I mean, that would be my preference rather than, I'm not saying people are liars. I'm just saying that it's just good practice.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to, and it gives more validity to your outcome.
Yeah.
If that's how you're, even in, I mean, this ties to your local evaluation plans, right?
Right.
How you're getting these measures. It adds validity to your outcomes if you have the documentation, as opposed to it was a survey at exit based on the individual's judgment.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I thought so. Thank you.
Yep. Morgan, do you have a question?
I do. Hi, good morning. So I wanted to just clarify for the grantees that have rental assistance and warm handoff, the progress report is the same. I'm asking that question because do you want the same level of detail for the services provided, even for the grantees that are providing like rental assistance versus the different grants?
Oh, excellent question. Thank you, Morgan. I have been sharing the rental assistance QPR. There are slight differences between the rental assistance QPR and the warm handoff QPR, but generally they are very similar. So I would say, yes, we're looking for the same level of detail, particularly around definition of success, demographic information, things like that. But the outcomes that we're requesting information for may be slightly different.
Okay, thank you.
And just as a reminder, Morgan, again, especially those of you who are double winners, it's all ARG, but they are still very separate, very distinct projects. So you have to be really careful about how you track, document, and report your data. And so you need to be very clear that your WHO QPR is only dealing with your WHO clients and WHO data. and your RA QPR is only dealing with your RA clients and RA data. Really, really important to keep those distinctions because these are not merging. Even though you may be serving the same people in both aspects, they are not merged, they are not one. So it's really important that you keep those very different and treat them as two separate grants because they are two separate grants.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Casey here?
Okay, so that concludes my overview of the QPR. You all do have local evaluation plans, which you're working on for your projects, which are due May 1st. May 1st or May 1st. I have set up what I'm calling open office hours to answer any questions you may have about your local evaluation plan as you work on that. So that email was sent out last Friday, I believe. If you want to join any of those sessions, you're more than welcome to. The next ones are tomorrow, Wednesday at 10 a.m. And then there's also one Thursday at noon. And then next week, there are ones scheduled for Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Okay, so take a look at that email and copy one of those calendar requests to your calendar if you want to join any of those and ask questions about your local evaluation plan. And that's all I have, Tanya.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. I just saw a question from Daquan in the chat. Can one assessment serve as an assessment for both grants? No, you have to assess the people for each project. If you are only assessing them once, you need to be clear on how those how the assessment scores are different for housing versus warm handoff. Again, because they are two separate projects, you need to treat them as two separate projects. You have to have case files for each project. It's not per person, it's for the project. So when I want to look at your files for your RA, you don't want to have your RA documentation mixed in with your warm handoff documentation and vice versa, because then that's going to create issues with tracking and documentation. The best advice is to treat these as two separate projects, two separate grants, two totally separate bodies that need to be managed. Any other questions on that, managing your double winter projects? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Danny, and she is going to talk to you about indirect costs. Danny? Danny, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was getting the screen up. Can everybody see it, or am I showing the wrong
No, we see it.
Right.
No,
we see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to go over our indirect cost rate documentation for ARG cohort 3. Some of you may have prior grants with us, cohort 1 or cohort 2. Just so you know, the indirect cost rate, as you may remember from the RFP process, is slightly different for this grant. So just keep that in mind if you do have a prior grant with us, that this indirect cost rate is slightly different. We are going to go over the budget and how to locate the indirect cost rate that you had previously put into your budget for your request for proposals. We're also going to talk about the different rates. We're going to talk about what documentation you need to provide to clarify what costs you are expending for indirect costs. We will discuss responsibilities of the grantee regarding indirect cost rate, and then we'll have a quick wrap-up summary. So as far as your budgeted indirect costs, as I stated at the time of request for proposals, each organization submitted to the BSCC a project budget, and the project budget broke down all the costs per line item, per category, and gave a small narrative to us of how those items are going to be utilized in your project. This rate is documented in the grant agreements that we are finalizing now. I know a lot of you have finalized contracts. For those of you that don't yet, we'll be getting those out to you shortly. But that's where you'll be able to find where your budget is. And I just want to have a quick reminder when it comes to your budgets, because this does come up a lot. Although your budget was approved by the Executive Steering Committee in a way when it was ranked, they're not direct employees of the BSCC. So there may be costs that need prior approval, may need justification, as certain indirect costs will need not justification, but documentation showing those rates that you are going to be invoicing at, as well as there might be some things on your budget that are not allowable per the grant that the ESC was not rating on. So please make sure that you do work with your field rep and your analyst to make sure that everything is budgeted for correctly. So we do have two types of allowable indirect cost rates for this grant. The first one is the de minimis rate, and this rate is applicable if an organization does not have a federally approved rate. So it is 10% of the total grant award. We also have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate that's applicable to this grant. This rate is only allowable for your organization if you have a federally approved rate on file with the BSCC. This rate is capped at 20% of the total grant award, regardless if your negotiated rate is higher than that. If for some reason your negotiated rate does fall underneath the 10% of the total grant award, you still must use that federally negotiated rate because that is the rate that you were approved to use. So which indirect cost rate do you use? Your organization must utilize whichever rate that was budgeted for in your project budget narrative. The project budget narrative, as I said, it was something that was rated by the ESC, the Executive Steering Committee. It became a rating factor in your RFP submission, which allowed your organization to be awarded for these funds. Your organization, if your organization is using your federally approved negotiated rate, you must remember the following: that your organization needs to submit valid documentation of this rate and any parameters that it might have regarding this rate. It is also the responsibility of your organization to keep the BSCC up to date on any changes that may be made to this rate. Changes might include that you applied for the next year the rate changes from 10% to 12%. We need to know that. Or if your rate expires and you get a new rate, we need to have that new documentation on file. Again, the rate cannot exceed 20% of your total grant award, and your rate, if it's less than 10% of your total grant award, you still must adhere to your negotiated rate. And just if you need to have a refresher, the negotiated indirect cost rate is mentioned in the grant guide. It just says that it does, although you do have a negotiated rate, let's say if your rate is 25%, the rate needs to go up to the rate established in the RFP, which again is 20% of the total grant award. And you will see at the bottom of the slide, what does the BSCC RFP budget template say? And this is a snippet from the budget that you did submit with your RFP. And it shows the two different options. One, and I'll read them both. Indirect costs do not exceed 10% of the total grant award, applicable if the organization does not have a federally approved indirect cost rate, which we call, this is the de minimis rate. And then the other option that you could have chosen, and you can only choose one option. The other option was indirect costs do not exceed 20% of the total grant award, applicable if the organization has a federally approved negotiated indirect cost rate. Amount claimed may not exceed the organization's federally approved indirect cost rate. So again, if your rate is only at 18%, this doesn't mean that you can then bill us for 20% of the total grant award. It has to be in accordance to whatever is written in your negotiated rate. So required documentation for indirect costs. Things to remember when submitting your invoices that do contain indirect cost expenditures. Always, again, this is very important. Always, always, always make sure the BSCC has your current federally approved indirect cost rate. And again, that's only if applicable, if your organization has that negotiated rate. Otherwise, you will be using the de minimis 10%. Grantees that claim indirect costs on an invoice must use the indirect cost rate listed in their executed grant agreement, which is also on your budget. As I just showed in the previous slide, a little snippet of it, it's at the very bottom of your budget. Again, so you must use this indirect cost rate that you chose because that is what was budgeted for. When requesting reimbursement for indirect costs, it is important to remember that the indirect cost rate is applied to the amount that was actually expended and requested for reimbursement. It is not by budgeted amount. We go off of actuals. So if you are claiming that 10% de minimis, you do need to have actual costs that will add up to that 10% of the grant award. All costs for those claiming de minimis must be supported by accounting records. We'll need to see invoices, purchase orders, canceled checks, any other supporting documentation and supporting payments to show that these were actual expenditures. So documentation for your indirect costs to submit during a desk review. When you're claiming indirect costs in an invoice, you must provide the calculation for how you came to this amount. So the indirect costs, when you are submitting your invoice, you are going to have to give us a calculation of how you came to that amount. And then you will either tell us this is our federally approved negotiated rate, or you would tell us that this is the de minimis rate. You should list out the costs associated with this total with applicable breakdowns if this is for the de minimis rate. When providing documentation for a desk review, which is a separate process from an invoice, but they also go hand in hand together, you must submit to BSCC a single-page document that's attached to your desk review packet, which gives the calculation for the amount that you are claiming for either rate. So you will just give us a simple breakdown because remember in your documentation, you'll have a checklist at the top, which will show a breakdown of each category of what you spent down that you would like to be reimbursed for. So that will be in your supporting documentation packet. If you are using the de minimis rate, this page that you broke down will also need to list out indirect costs that are being claimed with a short description and breakdown of the costs for each expenditure. A statement simply reiterating that you're using 10% and that calculation is not sufficient when utilizing the de minimis rate. The invoice, you also will then need to attach supporting documentation. You'll need to show invoices and how you got to that 10% of your total grant award calculation. Both the invoice and the desk review should be standalone documents. So please remember when you are listing out expenditures on your invoice, you don't put in a comment, see desk review for breakdown or, see desk review for all of the listed out expenditures. We need to have those as two separate standalone documents. And a reminder on grantee responsibilities. You'll always need to keep on file your negotiated indirect costs rate if it is applicable with the BSCC. You'll also need to keep the BSCC up to date on any changes that were made to your negotiated indirect costs rate. You'll need to maintain files of all indirect costs for when it is time for CMB. So there are certain costs that you will have to put into your desk review packets, but you will also need to have them on file with us for when Tanya does come down to conduct any sort of comprehensive monitoring visit, or if she needs to come down and help with a technical assistance meeting, it is very helpful to make sure that you have all of your fiscal ducks in a row, right? That we have all the documentation supporting these expenditures. When you are submitting an invoice or a desk review, please give us the applicable breakdowns and descriptions of the costs that you are putting in for reimbursement. And this does go farther than just indirect cost rate. This should be written in every single category of your invoice. If you're showing that you need to be reimbursed for certain salaries and benefits, we need to see that. We need to see it broken down by position, what the rate of the position is, what the calculation is, and et cetera, et cetera. And just make sure you're always in communication with the BSCC. If there's anything that's changing with your negotiated indirect cost rate, please reach out to your analyst to make sure that we are in the loop of any changes that might be applicable. And then also make sure that if you do have any questions, you do reach out to your analyst. We want to make sure that when you are submitting this documentation for reimbursement, it's done correctly. Anything that has to have a few back and forth, it really will tie up your payment. And I know that we're on a reimbursement schedule for this grant. So to make sure that you're paid promptly, please make sure that all your documentation is sent to us and complete. So just a quick brief summary. There are two types of indirect cost rates for ARG. We have the de minimis rate as well as your negotiated rate. You must follow your negotiated rate or your de minimis rate, whichever one is in your grant agreement that you did go under contract with. And this also will at one point be found in your invoice workbook once you are set up with the OneDrive. Otherwise, like we said earlier, it is in your budget in that template that was submitted for your request for proposal. Make sure you keep all documentation for indirect cost expenditures on file for CMV. Tanya will definitely look at that. So if you're claiming the de minimis and you're claiming 10% of the total grant award, we do need to see actual expenditures that are being allocated as indirect costs that add up to at least that 10% that it is capped at for this grant. When you are submitting invoices and desk reviews, be sure to provide the BSCC with a breakdown of calculations of how you got to the total that you are claiming for each item listed out. And always make sure the BSCC has your up-to-date negotiated indirect cost rate on file. This again is the grantee's responsibility. We will not be aware if you are going and trying to get a new indirect cost rate. All we know is what is on file with us. So it's very, very important that you get that over to us if you have not already, or you get the updated documents as they come in. And make sure you're always, I like to tell everybody, always review your grant administration guide. Any questions that you have may very well be answered in your grant guide. It has a lot of information in there. Just review your grant guide. I know that we have some invoicing coming up soon, so that will be your best friend, as well as any previous presentations that your ARG team has given to you. It will be very helpful to review all of that before submitting your first invoice. So review the grant administration guide, and then also make sure you're always reviewing your budget when you are submitting invoices and desk reviews. All expenditures have to be listed out in your budget. If they are not in your budget, please reach out to your analyst and we can see if we need to perhaps submit a budget modification for you, or if we need to look over if they are allowable costs or not. But that's all I have. So I will stop sharing. So Tanya, you could take it back.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danny. That was great information. Are there any questions on the indirect cost rate, the federally negotiated indirect cost rate, or the de minimis as it applies to any of your projects? Go ahead, Marilyn.
Hi, I have a question that directly connected with invoicing and indirect. So there is one thing I don't understand in invoicing, that, for example, if we have a couple invoices submitted to us for payments on March 31st, so those invoices are not going to be paid until April 5th. So we obviously, according to your guidance, cannot submit this for reimbursement, right? And in this case, it adds up to $8,000 for us on the books. We have accrual this is accrual accounting. So we accrue all those invoices, including this $8,000. And our P&L shows like $80,000, for example, but 8,000 of them would be paid in April. So now, if it will be paid in April and we cannot submit them for reimbursement, so our indirect cost, which will have to add up to 10% of our expenses, will they include this 8,000 that will be paid in April, or as on the books at 10% of total expenses that accrued at the moment of March 31st. So those two connected and first, so they kind of like don't compute with accounting or with invoicing.
So I'll say this, Marilyn, that is way outside of my realm, my wheelhouse. not what I do best here, that level of detail and how that works. And I do not have my senior auditor on this call that would be able to give me a little bit more insight in how to answer that question. One of the things that I can say, and I don't know if this provides any other insight into how you are looking at it, for BSCC, you have to report on a cash basis accounting system. We do not accept accrual-based accounting. So I don't know if that makes a difference for the question that you're asking, but I did hear you say that this is accrual-based accounting. And so if reporting it on a cash basis might make a difference, then you might want to look at how that impacts what you have to do. Because again, for BSCC reporting, it is a cash basis reporting and documentation system that we depend on.
But the whole agency, over $4 million were on accrual. So now like one program will be suddenly on cash. So expenses that were accrued in March, like they now, I can move them to April, that would be no problem, but it doesn't, it has to be compatible with our other programs, like suddenly one program is on cash. So it's just like, I don't know, I probably have to move them to April if they are March expenses.
You can only report expenses when they have been paid. You do not report expenses to BSCC when they have been accrued. You report expenses to BSCC when you have issued payment, whatever month that's in. So if the expense was accrued in March, but paid in April, you report it on your invoice in April.
Right. In accounting, it would be not equal. Expenses will never be equal to the grant revenues. So that's probably the only choice we have in order even to calculate 10% of indirect rate to move those expenses to April. That's what you think would be the best probably in this scenario?
Again, that is not my wheelhouse, so I am not going to make a recommendation or give guidance because there are lots of nuances in the question that you're asking that I'm just not familiar with, and I just don't have the capacity to really answer that with any real level of confidence or any definitiveness with it. However, what you can do, what I would encourage you to do is reach out to Natalia and myself with your question in particular, and I will connect with my senior auditor to see if she can give me some better guidance to share with you on what your particular concern is.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Yeah.
You're welcome.
And Tanya, we did have in the chat, it's kind of what you touched on. So if we have an invoice in March, but pay in April, can this expense be reimbursed in Q2 or Q3? So Q2 ends March 31st, I believe. So if you paid out the expense in April, that would be the next quarter is what that would be shifted to. So again, it is on cash basis, not accrual. So when money is coming in or money's coming out, that's when you're reporting it, not when those expenses occurred necessarily.
Great. Thank you, Danny.
Okay, thank you, Danny.
Any other questions around the indirect cost rate? Okay. One other thing I wanted to add or emphasize is that on the indirect cost rate, if you have the federally negotiated indirect cost rate and your rate expires, we will only pay up through the date that's on your letter for your negotiated indirect cost rate. So it is incumbent upon you to be very aware of where you are in that process and to make sure that you are reaching out to your cognizant agency in plenty of time so that you get your updated letter or your renewal if you're going to be applying for one in time so that you do not have a break in your ability to claim your federally negotiated indirect cost rate. I hope that made sense. It felt kind of convoluted. So again, the basis is if you have a letter, your letters expire. Some are 1 year, some are 3 years, it just depends. But you need to make sure that you are aware when your letter expires and that you request renewal in enough time that you get us the updated letter before your current letter expires. Okay, so again, that is one of those grantee responsibilities that Danny had mentioned in her presentation. All right, any other questions, thoughts, comments around indirect cost rates? Perfect. Before I move on to housekeeping, I got a question about QPR. So Casey, I want to grab you while you're still here and make sure that I answer this correctly and maybe even have you tell us where this is located on the form. So the question was, for each quarter, I'm documenting everyone enrolled or everyone newly enrolled. For example, we have 25 enrolled, but 10 newly enrolled. Which one am I reporting on? And so I believe we have a space, Casey, help me here. If I believe we have a space where we're counting total active participants and then the ones that enrolled in this quarter. Can you help clarify how that needs to be documented?
Yeah, I'm gonna share screen real quick here.
Thank you.
So in section F is where you will report newly enrolled. So these are individuals enrolled just during this reporting period. So this will do, you know, obviously it changes by reporting period. Sorry, pardon the scrolling. I can't remember all the periods, but this first thing you tell us is which reporting period you are reporting for. So quarter 1 was October through December and quarter 2 was January through March. So let's say you're filling out quarter 2. Pardon the scrolling one more time. In section F, let's say in quarter 2, January through March, you enrolled, I forget the numbers you told me, Tanya, but let's say you enrolled 10 individuals. You would report just the 10 individuals in section F. And all of the demographic information that you report is for those 10 individuals. It is section G that asks you about all of your participants, regardless of when they enrolled. So this is where you would report that higher number of all participants who are engaged in services. So if quarter 1 you enrolled 15 and quarter 2 you enrolled 10, this number should probably be 25. And then you would report the services that these 25 individuals received. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you so much. That did clarify it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Casey.
I was, sure.
All right, awesome. So the last thing for us is some housekeeping. Sorry about that. So for housekeeping, I have a couple of pieces I want to just share with you. One key piece in the original slide, I had talked about, I had mentioned that we would talk about enrolling participants in multiple ARG projects. I had gotten a couple of requests from a couple of different projects over the last several months, just asking, how can we do this if I am referring to another ARG grantee for different services? So yes, you can do that. However, it is incumbent upon you as the primary grantee to make sure you have a policy for how you refer your participants out. You need to have a referral form for tracking who they've been referred to and for which services. The other key piece that you want to make sure you have documented, or not that you've documented, but the other key piece is how you track the data. So if I am CBOA and my ARG program focuses on education and job training, but I have a participant who needs some support with education. Say they also need to get their high school diploma, but I don't have those services in my organization. So I am referring participant A to CBOB for education services only. CBOB will not enroll that participant into their ARG program. They are going to count that participant as a second enrollment because they are only providing education services as a referral from the primary ARG grantee. Does that make sense to you guys? So you want to make sure, because what we're trying to do is avoid skewing the data and duplicating outcomes for the same person in different projects. So if you only provided education services as a referral, even though you may collect the information, because you still may collect the data when the person is referred over, you may still do your full assessment or whatnot. Because that person is referred to you from a different ARG project, you need to only document in your progress report your outcomes as they apply to that one participant, only for the services that they were referred to you to receive. So I want to make sure that that's clear on how you will handle the where you have participants that are going between multiple ARG projects. We really just need to make sure that we are not skewing the data and that we're able to provide good information to our state legislature who will be looking at this information. One of the things that you'll get in the next couple of sessions, Casey has created a dashboard for cohort 2, and we intend to have something similar for cohort 3, where we do track and show, and it'll be public, how many folks are being served and what their outcomes are. So it's really important that that data is tracked properly and reported accurately. So that's kind of where we'll go with that. And then if you have questions on that, let me know. Other things on housekeeping, a couple of things we just want to make sure for the project calls, again, when you check in, we want to make sure that you check in via the chat. Make sure you have your first and last name and your ARG project title. It is a reminder that both your project director and your authorized financial officer are required for these calls. You need to make sure that when you check in the chat that we are clear who's the AFO and who is the project director, because we do track that information and make sure that we have had the appropriate people present for these calls. So please make sure that you are checking into the chat in the appropriate fashion so that we can manage the attendance and know who we need to follow up with, et cetera, et cetera. Also, for your contact sheets, when you are changing the people who are serving in those key roles in your project, your grantee contact sheet, you want to make sure that you submit a new sheet in its entirety every time you need to make changes. Please remember, you cannot send us a sheet and say, oh, just change this one position. We want to see all of the positions each time you submit your contact sheet. Please make sure that you submit your contact sheets swiftly when you have changes in your project contacts. Here's another one that's really important. It's emailing to the ARG mailbox, especially for those of you who are double winners. Please do not send emails for both projects in one email. We track those emails because they are separate projects. We track them separately. If you send us one email with your warm handoff workbook and your rental assistance workbook, we are unable to track all of your information electronically because everything is now in one email. So it's really important that you handle these as very separate projects. Send emails for rental assistance. Make sure it's in your subject title. This is for ABC Rental Assistance Project, ABC Warm Handoff Project, and make sure those emails are separate and distinct and are coming in as the individual projects that they are. Please make sure that you are emailing to the ARG Cohort 3 email box. You are welcome to CC me on any emails that you're sending to the email box. And also please remember that most of your questions will start with the ARG email box. Natalia will review them, and if it's something that needs to be bumped up to the field rep level, or if it needs to just go to Danny as her manager, Natalia will sort those out and make sure it gets to the right place. Especially because I'm in the field a lot, it can take several days for me to respond to an email. If you are asking a question that's really simple, I had one come in the other day about preparing something that needed to be submitted by Friday, but I wasn't available to answer the email. And it was a question that Natalia would have been able to answer swiftly. So it's really important that you send those emails to the ARG Cohort 3 email box so that you can get a swift return. If there's something that you need specifically from me, please feel free to email me directly. I am not saying that you cannot email me directly. Just understand that there may be delays in getting responses from me depending on what my travel schedule is and where I am with regards to catching up on emails and all of those other things that are happening. So the key takeaway there is to remember that start with the ARG Cohort 3 email box for your correspondences. Prior approval items, those of you who are planning to use incentives and participant support items, you do need to make sure that you get those memos into us. I do have a few that have come in. Again, I have been in the field and my priority right now is closing out Cohort 1. So those may wait, those may be on hold for another couple of weeks. But as I am able to get to them, I am moving through those as well. But you do need to make sure that you have your request for incentive approvals into us before you submit your invoices for those items, right? And let me kind of clarify that a little bit. If on invoices 1 and 2, you have purchased and used participant supports and incentives, make sure that your letter has been sent along with your invoice. I'm not asking you to necessarily hold off on those, on reporting those if you've already been moving in that direction. But you need to make sure that we have your letter. Otherwise, we're going to send back your invoice and have you take those out so that we can process your invoice while you are requesting approval for your participant support, food and beverage, or incentive items. Again, another reminder, Danny did mention to make sure that you are using your grant guide, review your budget narrative, review your orientation materials as you are preparing your invoices, and make sure that the most important thing you can do is when you are preparing your invoice, always pull up your project budget narrative. When you are documenting expenses in your invoice, if they are not clearly linked to your budget narrative, please make sure that you provide a comment to explain why these items are not in your narrative, and let us know if this means we need to look at doing a budget modification. Otherwise, these items are going to be kicked back to you, requesting removal, requesting clarification, etc. So just make sure that you are pulling up that budget narrative, comparing it to what you are documenting in your invoice to ensure that we're able to move your invoices through swiftly. And I think that's really it. One other point I want to make, on your invoices and your budget narrative, Danny had mentioned earlier as well that sometimes that because the ESC is not staff of the BSCC when they review and approve the proposals for award, they are not intimately aware of the nuances that govern how we approve or navigate through the budget process or approvable expenses, etc. So just because your budget narrative was awarded, it does not mean it is 100% allowable. Even though your invoices have been approved, it does not mean that all of your expenses are necessarily 100% in the clear. What happens is when we come out for a comprehensive monitoring visit, that is when our auditor will do a deeper review of your fiscal submissions. And our senior auditor may find things in previous invoices that have already been approved that either myself or the analyst or Danny may have missed. Those things will still be addressed and may still be disallowed at a later time. So I just want to make sure that you are clear on how that process can work. So again, it's really important that you are confirming your expenses with what's in your budget narrative, communicating with us if we need to do a budget mod or if there are some things that we need to discuss in more detail, and make sure that you are clear that there are always opportunities where things may later be disallowed, even though they may have been approved in a previous invoice. So I am going to stop there. I see there are questions coming in the chat. So let me look at these. Let's see. Contact sheets. Is it possible to add staff in addition to the specified roles to receive email communications? No, we have those 4 roles and you have 1 additional contact at the bottom. We do not have the staff and capacity to be responsible for multiple people getting emails, etc. So we expect that the grantee, you will designate someone on that contact list to always forward BSCC correspondence to those people within your organization or your project that require that information. So please only give us the 4 contacts plus your additional. In our initial budget and grant agreement, we allocated a specific amount of money toward our evaluation. We've had to increase that amount due to inflation and the evaluator's invoice. Do we need to send a budget modification? Yes, you will need to do a budget modification. If you are charging more than what's allocated, then that means you will not have enough money to pay for it. And we need to know where you intend to find that money so that we can continue to assess if you will remain in alignment with your project scope. So there may not be money for you to move to cover that cost. So we will need to do an evaluation of your budget to determine how you will cover the changes in those costs. Alicia, is that a question to me or is that a question in general? Hope Solution?
You.
Okay, I'll address that later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the desk review, do we include proof of payment for the copy of the bill that is submitted? Yes. We need to see that the invoice was paid. Again, this is a cash basis accounting system that BSCC works on. We are not interested solely in when the expense was accrued. We need to see, because we are paying you for the expense, we need to see that you have actually paid the expense. So yes, you need to include proof of payment in your desk review packet for anything for which you are requesting reimbursement. If we are subcontracting, do we need receipts and or additional backup documentation outside of invoices from subcontractors for subcontractor payment reimbursements? If yes, what documentation is requested? This is a great question, Anastasia, and subcontractors are a unique can of worms, I'll say. So if you are working with subcontracted agencies, if you have provided space in your grant where you are subcontracting for additional services with an outside CBO, what we need is the invoice and support from your subcontractor. Yes. All of the particulars, however, we do not require for your desk review packet. And this is going to be a little convoluted, but work with me. If you are working with a subcontractor, you by definition become an extension of the BSCC. So you have to ensure that you have all of the appropriate documentation for the subcontract expenses. You do not need to send those to us for your desk review. However, when we come for a comprehensive monitoring visit or the CMV, we will not only review your documentation, but we will also visit your subcontract agency and we will review their fiscal records as well. So it is important that you have a really clear chain of documentation for those expenses and that you require your subcontractor to provide you with enough documentation. Just imagine whatever BSCC requires of you would be the same types of documentation that you would want to require from your subcontractor. Again, all of that documentation that you require from your subcontractor does not need to be sent to us with your desk review, but you do need to keep it on file when we come out for your visit. In our initial budget and grant agreement, we allocated a specific amount of money toward our evaluation. We've had to, oh, I think I answered that one already. Sorry, I did. I think that's it. Bianca, I do see your question and I will respond to you privately also. Okay. Are there any other questions from any of the information that I shared around housekeeping? Okay.
This is Abby from Starting Over Inc.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Abby.
And, hi, how are you? So I just have a question. So when we were talking about the budget, so we were trying to, when we started cohort 3 on March 1st, we started doing different like programming. And when I was reading 26 to 28, what would be allowable as far as being able to program the participants, it talked about some food, some gift card items, some incentives, different things of that nature. So I put in for those items based upon the budget line. Then I heard back and I was told that there had to be some justifications. I received the forms, justification forms. I filled those out. I sent those in. Apparently they were supposed to go to the ARG3, but I sent them in to Tanya specifically. So then they were kicked back, and so since then I have sent them into the correct place. My concern is that I haven't heard anything back. We want to, so the grant is for parolees, and we have parolees that are coming out from doing 15, 27 years. They have absolutely nothing. No money, no documents, no hygiene, no nothing. And we want to be able to provide them with that, but we cannot spend that without approval, and we can't do the approval without the justification and the purchase requisition form. But then I sent that, and I still don't have any response at all about how to do that. And so my concern is that this grant is for parolees, and they're coming from the penal system. They're coming from nothing. Yet my hands are tied in trying to get them started with the program. And according to the contract, we can offer them certain items, but I can't do that without the approval. And that's one thing. And then when we're trying to do the groups and trying to get them acclimated, trying to get them to, at least try to program so that they could be successful. Because, again, you have somebody that's been in so long, just to tell them, okay, you can come out, it's harm reduction, drink a little bit. That's, and then they're free to come and go. That's not very helpful. And I don't think that that's actually realistic. And I think that trying to do some type of programming and incentivize them is what's helpful. But if we're asking them to do something, and like we have these groups that are off site, they're 3 or 4 hours, and they go into breakfast and lunch, and then we want to provide that for them, but we're told, no, you can't do that. I'm confused. I'm confused as to how this is supposed to be successful if our hands are constantly tied, but according to 26, 28, we can offer that. So that's my concern.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm tracking 100% where the breakdown is, because what I was sharing earlier is what's important is that if you have started and you're providing those supports, you need to make sure that your letter is in before or while we are processing that invoice.
Yeah, we did that, but we still haven't heard anything back. That's what
we haven't received an invoice yet.
So you're saying that you haven't received an invoice from, oh, you're talking about for the new cohort, so for cohort 3.
Yes. Have you been providing the services and the supports, or are you not doing anything because you're waiting on the approval letter?
No, absolutely not. We're not waiting. No, we are providing. We're doing the best we can with what we have. So okay. I'm going to continue to go forward. But I can't. But anything that I do, I can't submit. Which that's fine because at the end of the day, I'm still very participant centered. So I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that they have what they have. Whether I have to eat that cost myself. But I'm just saying that. So now what you're saying is that it has to be attached with the invoice. So yeah, I'm just really confused. I'm gonna be honest with you. So because I was told that we needed the justification and the POs, which I sent.
I'm not sure what a PO is.
Well, it's just that's what I'm calling it. It's like a purchase requisition. So you guys call it justification. I call it okay. So the justification form where we're basically saying, hey, this is exactly like the gift card incentive log. This is what we're asking for. And so that was sent along with the justification narrative. Yeah. And so I was told that needed to go to a certain email, which we did, but I didn't know that it had to be. So now you're saying it has to be attached with the invoice.
No,
how
no,
does that
it does not have to be attached. So if you are moving forward, if you are providing the services, providing the supports because it's in your budget narrative and you've confirmed with the grant guide that based on, you know, what you're seeing, you're in line with the grant guide and everything continues to align, then you implement your program. You are in the process. You are doing what you need to do. You are just waiting for us to be able to get to the review of your justification submission. By the time you submit your invoice that may have some of those costs documented, we should be able to catch you up and have them both ready for you at the same time. And if we have any additional questions, we'll ask them then.
But how can we do that? But how can we do that, Tanya, if we're not allowed to do any spending without prior approval? I think that's my question.
You are on reimbursement?
That's correct.
Right. So you are spending your money and asking us to reimburse you.
Right, but according to the email, if I read it correctly, we still have to get prior approval. And then in the last meeting, you said you can't spend anything without prior approval. Now, did I hear that wrong? Because
no, you are right. You are right. You are correct. That is what was said. So let me walk that back and let me clarify, because there's no way we're going to have everybody cleared in advance, right? So technically you are responsible for ensuring that you are spending or doing your things within the parameters that are outlined. We will not approve your supports, your gift cards, or anything in your invoice if we do not have a justification form that is approved. Does that make sense?
Yes, but you just said that again, though. If it's not approved, that's the part that doesn't make sense. How will I know if it's approved if I've already spent it?
We will tell you when we've been able to review your submission. That goes back to, unfortunately, you've got one field rep, one analyst, and 100 and some odd grantees. So, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day.
Right.
And we're getting to things as quickly as we can. So your approval isn't going to come in 24 hours after you send it to us.
Oh, I'm clear on that. But just for clarity and just for the sake of transparency. So I go and according to the contract, I can get a couple of gift cards for X, Y, and Z for the client, for the participant, based upon the need. And then as long as it's within the parameters of what I have in front of me, as far as what you guys have documented, then it should be okay. And when we submit these invoices, it should be approved. And but it has to have the justification prior to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
Tanya, and just to add on that too, while we're discussing anything revolving incentives and justifications, I just wanted to clarify for everybody that it still needs to be within your budget. So just because you're trying to get some costs approved, we still need to make sure that those items are in your budget, because then you would, instead of needing to get a justification, you would also need to be first submitting to us a budget modification. And that process takes a while. So if you are wanting to purchase gift cards as incentives or, you know, various supportive services, we do need to make sure that those are budgeted for first.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's within the. I'm specifically talking about what is approved or on the budget and in the contract. That's all I'm talking. I'm not talking about anything extra or anything like that.
Right. So again, that's where I was saying, when you are documenting your invoices, it's important that you pull up your budget narrative. And if you don't have gift cards in your budget narrative, then you're not approved to do gift cards, right? So you can't submit gift cards in your invoice because it won't fit in your budget narrative, and you will need a budget modification. That's one piece. The second piece, you're waiting for us to provide the approval for your incentive justification form. You have started documenting spending and moving forward with program implementation, which means you have provided some incentives, you have provided some participant supports, and it's time for you to prepare invoices 1 and 2. Invoices 1 and 2 are going to show that you have expensed funds in those categories. Again, as long as that information is in your budget narrative, that these are things that you had already budgeted to spend, and we know we have your justification request pending, we will be working through the 2 of those at the same time.
Okay, thank you very much, Tanya. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other questions about anything that we've covered today? All right. The last thing is, and I want to double check myself on the progress reports. For those folks on monthly, Casey and Natalia, are they doing progress reports monthly, or they're still only doing progress reports quarterly?
My understanding is quarterly.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, then that's my error. So, oops, sorry. So disregard monthly for progress reports, but do know that your invoices are due May 15th. Invoice 1 and 2, if you are quarterly, invoices 1 through 6, or as they're documented in your workbook, 1A, B, and C, and 2A, B, and C. So those will be due May 15th, and then your quarterly progress report is due May 15th. And what is not on here is that your LEP is due May 1st. So please make sure that you adhere to those due dates. Your next project call will be scheduled in August of 23, and we will get those dates out to you as we get closer to that time. I am scheduling time off in July, August, so I just need to confirm where my time off will be before I solidify those August dates. And if there is nothing else, that's all I've got. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, Tanya. Too.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No.